programs across the state. You know, we need to grow those programs. When you look at a lot of the jobs that Governor Haley and Secretary Hitt have recruited to South Carolina over the last 6 years, a lot of those jobs don't need a four-year degree. We still need to generate four-year degree students because there's going to be a shortage of those if you look at the statistics as well. But we also need to focus on some of those certificate-based education programs.
Sure.
You know, welding, for example, electricians, you know, obviously engineers. So when you look at those needs that the business community has, we need to align our education system to fill those needs.
You know, and speaking as a small business owner and someone who worked in management and tried to recruit and hire, you know, we talk about there's no jobs. But I've seen a lot of times the reality for a company, be it Michelin or you know, Jim Bob's hardware store, it's actually there's no employees. There aren't qualified people, whether it's a degree based or I went to college, but I'm not sure I could take apart a carburetor in my Dodge.
Right.
And so you've got those skills.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting. You're right. There isn't enough qualified candidates. It's the other way around.
Right. Correct. So we have a shortage of workers in certain fields, and the state and the business community is working together to try to do that. Last year, the General Assembly passed House Bill 4145, which for the first time set up a state workforce coordinating council.
Mm-hmm.
And on that council, you have, you know, the government entities, Commerce and Department of Employment and Workforce, and our technical college system, and four-year comprehensive and research folks. But you also have the chamber got a seat on that committee to appoint a business leader to. So you have business that has a seat at the table, and Secretary Hitt, who chairs the coordinating council, has set up an advisory council of business folks that can help kind of guide the efforts and have the state have one state workforce coordinated effort on the workforce development front.
Right. And you're talking about developing not only kids from Lexington and the Midlands, but also attracting qualified candidates from everywhere, right? It's not just a eccentric, you know, to South Carolina.
Yeah, so when you look at another project that was done this past year, completed, the Department of Employment and Workforce completed their Sector Strategies project, which broke the state into 4 regions and identified the needs for jobs and candidates for jobs in those regions. And really all 4 regions came up with the same needs. And, you know, if you look at diversified manufacturing, if you look at IT and business services or construction or healthcare or transportation and logistics, you know, those 5 things South Carolina needs more of, and we've got to develop a system that recruits and also develops workers to do those jobs.
Now, we talked a bit about the career and technology centers. I know there's most counties or most school areas have one. I know Lexington Richland 5 is a fantastic one up in Chapin, and we've done a lot of work. You know, I've been involved with that one through my time. But beyond that, tell me about, we are a very military-heavy state here, a lot of retirees and folks actually who actively serve, but I understand you're working for a benefit for those guys
Right.
who retire as well.
Yeah, so basically our members identified that some of the best workforce development opportunities that we have are if we can recruit retired military folks to come to South Carolina. You know, the military folks, a lot of them retire at 20 years of service, so they're still in their late 40s and going to work another 20 years or 15 years. So some of the keys to filling this workforce shortage is to have an environment that has military retirees who know South Carolina come to South Carolina to retire. And we often hear from military retirees that they're going to go to those states that don't tax their benefits.
Right.
So we've advocated, along with the military base task force, we've advocated for complete elimination of retiree benefits to try to get those folks to come here. They come here, they fill our mental management positions. You know,
Sure.
A lot of employers will say, just find me somebody that I can train, that'll show up to work on time and pass a drug test, and I can teach them to do what I need them to do.
Right.
And you know who does that? You know, the military retirees have done that for their entire career, and the discipline that it needs, and could fill a real gap. It's not the silver bullet, but it would be another kind of fill the gap type proposal that would help on the workforce front.
Sure, and I understand, Ted, you also are a member of the military as well.
Yeah, I serve in the South Carolina National Guard, so know that, and it's near and dear. And you know, we the workforce and the business community front, the military is a great training ground for really good workers.
And we appreciate your service, by the way, sir, to the state and to the community as a service member as well. Speaking with Ted Pitts, the president of the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce here on Midlands Matters. You can check out their website, schamber.net. and of course we'll put links for you at 943thedude.com and coladaily.com. Do you have to own a small business to be involved in the Chamber of Commerce?
You know, you need to be a business person to join, but I mean, we do have some individuals that join, so you need to have some relation to the business community, and
Okay.
but I mean, anybody can get involved, and would encourage them to do that. You know, we're working on issues. We're talking about our competitiveness agenda, and we talked about workforce, but we're working on things like infrastructure as well. You know, when you look at where we are on infrastructure in South Carolina, you know, we're asking them to finish the job. The General Assembly's passed 2 bills over the last 3 years that have bonded some money to go primarily to our interstates and some bridges, and that's needed. But you know, also when we look at transportation across the state, we've got to finish the job on that effort to have enough revenue to actually repair our secondary and primary system as well.
Tell me why it's important to the Chamber and a small business. I mean, it's just the highways. Why is that a concern of the Chamber?
So basically, when you look at folks, your employees traveling to and from work, you know, it's a safety issue. We have about 1,000 individuals a year killed on South Carolina roads. But when you look at products, when you look at Pete Selleck, for example, the CEO of Michelin North America, which is up in Greenville, South Carolina, when he says stuff like, you know, Michelin's going to have to look at other states for our future expansion unless South Carolina can get the infrastructure correct. So when you look at the Port of Charleston, which is a world-class port, you know, the best on the eastern seaboard, you know, the post-45-foot deepening projects, which is going to allow for the big post-Panamax ships to call on Charleston. When you look at that, you know, what connects our manufacturers and our jobs and production to the port is our infrastructure. So we've got to get it right, and I think the General Assembly realizes that. And we've got to get them coalesced around a plan that they can agree on that ultimately delivers a sustainable revenue stream. So you can't fund roads with one-time money. You've got to do it with a sustainable revenue stream. And when you look at what Georgia and North Carolina, the people we're competing against a lot of times for these jobs and growth, when you look at Georgia and North Carolina spends about 10 times per lane mile on their roads that we spend here in South Carolina. And Georgia's about 5 or 6 times per lane mile than we do here in South Carolina. So we've got some work to do there, and we're hopeful that we can get something through the General Assembly this year that will ultimately solve the problem. You know, we agree that, you know, we need to make sure the money's being spent responsibly, and we're going to hold the government accountable that they do that.
Sure, and not to knock the South Carolina DOT, they do a great job, but you certainly can, to your point, feel that difference in the roadways when you cross over some state lines. You can feel the difference in the asphalt, and I'm not a DOT guy. I don't know how that's made up, but I know when I cross that line, the roads feel different in my truck.
Well, just ride from I-95 from Georgia to South Carolina, where you go from 8 lanes of smooth roads, smooth asphalt, across a bridge into 4 lanes of very bumpy asphalt and sometimes potholes. So the damage that our roads cause to traffic or to vehicles, you know, personal vehicles, but also commercial vehicles, I think that they would tell you that cost has an impact. And you know, it's time that we step up. You know, you can argue about things that may not be a core function of government, but I don't think anybody can argue that our infrastructure, our road system, is a core function of government.
Right.
And it's something that, you know, some private sector interest or some not-for-profit isn't just going to go around paving roads. The government has to do this, and you know, we're calling the leaders at the State House to get the job finished this year.
Sure. Speaking with Ted Pitts from the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce this morning on Midlands Matters. It's about all things Chamber of Commerce. You know, obviously, if you own a small business or involved in business, the Chamber has an impact on you. But clearly, even just from what we've talked about in the last 10 minutes, the Chamber has an impact on you, whether you're just an employee down the street. You can be touched by that with these education programs, with the roads as well. But talking about businesses specifically, and as a small business owner, sometimes it's difficult to do business in South Carolina. As a business, you want to open up, you want to go prosper for yourself, be an entrepreneur, as they say. But sometimes it's hard because of our own red tape.
Yeah, so the third thing on our competitiveness agenda gets to that front, and it's business licensing. So, and I've often said that one of the most business unfriendly things that we do here in South Carolina, specifically for small businesses, is the business licensing process. So if you're an operator of a business and you do business in multiple municipalities, you're required in each one of those municipalities to go to City Hall, fill out their paperwork, and apply for a business license and pay the tax. It's a tax. The license requires you to pay a fee.
That's really the point of that licensing, I'm
Right,
sure, right?
That's right. It's to collect revenue. And if you look at a place like Columbia, you know, they may have 300 different rate classes that you have to figure out which one you fit in. And then you go over to Lexington, and you're in there's 7 different rate classes, and you have to figure out which one you're in. You know, we've got members that have to pull 80 different licenses from around the state. And when you think about that, that's 80 different expiration dates, multiple rate classes, compliance is a burden. And we have businesses that say, I have one employee that their job is to make sure we comply with the business licensing process around the state and some regulations that municipalities, put on us. So we're trying to standardize that process and centralize it so that you could go to one place, one online portal. We call for the Secretary of State to be who houses that, and apply for your business license across the state, be able to be in compliance, and to be able to do business.
You know, it does sometimes feel like we may be collectively as a state cutting off our nose to spite our face, and that you're right. If I am going to expand my lawn service, I may not. I'm in 2 counties. I maybe don't want to worry about Kershaw County, so I'm not going to expand. I may not expand my company. I do better. I'm not going to expand and hire people in Kershaw to work for me because I don't feel like dealing with that extra red tape. So that's a great point, a great objective.
We've had members that said they've been called to ask to do a job, and they would say, it doesn't make sense for us to do the one job in this municipality because then I have to go pull a license, and I'm only going to do that one job. I don't see the growth, so you need to call somebody else. So, I think when we look at the simplicity of being able to do business across the state, it doesn't seem like, once you drive across the street, and a lot of times you don't know where the border is for the municipality.
Right.
Once you drive across the street, you got to go to a new city hall to pull a business license. And it's really just cumbersome, and it's time for us to try to standardize and simplify that process to make it more efficient for businesses and for government.
Sure. Talking with Ted Pitts from the South Carolina Chamber. So we've talked about the filling in the workforce pipeline, which is getting folks, qualified candidates, whether it's college degree, master's degree, or a certificate from one of the Cates centers, finish the roads project, and of course cutting the red tape. That's your 17 agenda. What's your outlook on your timeline for actually accomplishing, at least making some effort and some push on these?
So every session is a 2-year session, but we're hopeful that the first year of this 2-year session will be productive. We'll continue to make progress and take steps on the workforce front. I'm confident with that, with the conversation with our legislative leaders and our state's leaders. Roads will be an issue that's dealt with. That along with pensions, pension reform that you're reading about in the newspaper right now. Those, I think, will be the 2 big issues that the General Assembly has to deal with this year. And we're hopeful that they can actually get some done and get it across the finish line, and we can move on to working on other places and other areas where South Carolina needs to improve its business climate so we can, again, be the best place to live, work, and do business in the country.
And I think it's important to set expectations. Obviously none of these are going to be done by March. And this isn't like hey, we're done June 1, every road in South Carolina is going to be perfect. This is a long-term agenda, but at least it's going to start the conversation, getting us to that point.
Yeah, and we're going to call on them for action and to get something done. The General Assembly is in session now from really January till middle or end of May, and they need to get some things done, and the business community's watching.
Sure. All right, so I'm sure, Ted, you're aware, and I'm sure hopefully most everybody is, there was something of an election a month and a half ago or so, and coming up on Friday, we're going to switch the peaceful transition, as it's called for, of power from one president to the next, and in President-elect Trump, he has been very vocal on making America great, bringing jobs back, bringing companies back to the country. He keeps touting of Ford and these thousands of jobs he's saving. We're also watching the stock market has been at historic levels. Great stuff. And of course he's taking the credit, and perhaps that is. But can you talk to me about that a little bit? The business community, how it feels. Are they excited about Trump, or are they just excited for difference, or where does that stand?
I would say that the business community is excited. They're excited for change. The last 8 years, I think regulations have been increased in the burden on businesses. And just, a fresh approach. So the business community is excited about President-elect Trump's coming into office in a Congress that appears to be wanting to do some tough things like tax reform. So when you look at the Better Way plan that the House GOP conference put out, and Speaker Paul Ryan's the lead on it, you know, that plan is very comprehensive, and there are things in that plan that the business community is really interested in seeing if we can get implemented. You know, tax reform has been talked about for a long time. It's always talked about by every, at least Republican administration. But we think that there's a chance to actually, for tax reform to be front and center. You know, a lot of the conversation right now is around, you know, repealing Obamacare.
Right.
You know, I think the business community would say, we do need changes in the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare. And we're hopeful that, you know, they'll take a very prudent approach to that and have the replacement plan in place when they repeal Obamacare. So we're supportive and encouraged by those talks. And as we talk to the South Carolina delegation, I think they understand that there has to be some drastic changes made on that front as well. But I think by and large, the business community is encouraged. You know, on the trade front, South Carolina is a big exporter. So on the trade front, and if somebody said, what are you concerned about? You know, we believe that fair trade agreements around the world are key to our country. You know, the reason, you know, sometimes people talk about all these jobs moving to Mexico, you know, but one of the things, if you look at, you know, Mexico has entered into like 31 different trade agreements, free trade agreements with other countries, you know, while we've been sitting back kind of holding pat. And if you're a manufacturer and you can go manufacture your product to Mexico, you aren't doing that just to sell it to Americans. You're doing that to sell it around the world because they have better trade agreements in place. So,
Sure.
So we're hopeful that the conversation about fair trade is key and is front and center, and we believe it will be. So, you know, the president-elect as a business person been very successful, so the business community is encouraged by what they're hearing talked about that they're going to work on in the first 100 days.
Right. And